Do you have a moment? It's about your mother-in-law. The doctor, who had pulled on my arm, looked at me with a deeply concerned expression. It's been 10 years since my mother-in-law became wheelchair-bound, and she has regularly been going to the hospital for checkups and physical therapy. That day, my mother-in-law's at the hospital for the same reason, undergoing tests. I was waiting for my mother-in-law in the waiting room before her therapy session when this doctor grabbed my arm. I'm gonna speak with her primary doctor about this. I gently released my arm from the doctor's grip. The doctor standing in front of me was a man, but my mother-in-law's primary was a woman. I didn't heard of any change in her primary care doctor. I was puzzled as to why a doctor who wasn't her primary would want to talk about my mother-in-law. Seeing the suspicion in my eyes, the male doctor hastily grabbed my hands. There's something neither your mother-in-law nor her primary doctor should hear. That's why I only want to tell you. Huh? Only me? I took a step towards the doctor, who was looking at me with a grave expression. My name is Julie. I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I work at a small and medium-sized company, but for some reason, I've been working remotely lately. When I was a child, my mother left home, and I was raised in a single-parent family. My father was always like, your mother was a no-good woman who ran off with a younger man. He advised me to never meet her. All I heard was that her name was Yvonne and she was a spendthrift, treating me like a nuisance and my father like a slave. My parents eventually divorced, and thanks to my father working day and night, I was able to go to college and find a job, albeit not at a big firm. Even though I didn't have a mother, I never felt lonely because of all the love my father gave me. After starting work, I've lived alone and become independent. 14 years ago, I married Mike. Mike's father had passed away 2 years before our wedding, and his mother, who was living alone, warmly welcomed me into their family, treating me like her own daughter. For years into our marriage, my mother-in-law was involved in a car accident and became wheelchair-bound. My mother-in-law used to be a lively and cheerful woman, but since the accident, her smiles have disappeared, and she's become very withdrawn. It must be hard for her to accept limited mobility. Though she had various caregivers over the years, it seemed none of them were a good match, and she seemed to deteriorate. She kept contacting us, saying she felt lonely and wanted us to come back, even if it was for a short while. Concerned, we decided to move back into his family home to take care of her. We decided to take a week off using our paid time off to dedicate to her care, and then return to our jobs once she was feeling better. My mother-in-law seemed relieved when my husband and I came to visit. After a few days, she began to smile again. But when we told her that we needed to get back to work, her demeanor changed completely. She didn't let us go. She was like, no. Please, both of you, don't leave. Don't leave me alone, crying out, nearly hysterical. Trying to calm her, I was like, look. Mike really needs to get back to his job, but I'll talk to my company and see if I can stay here a bit longer. I'll come back as often as I can. Just hang in there for me. Julie, if you can stay, that'd be great. Mike, you better come back, okay? I'll be waiting. After the loss of her husband, my mother-in-law had been alone for a long time. When we, as a couple, came to visit, she was overjoyed. But our sudden notification of leaving her likely brought on feelings of anxiety and confusion. I guessed her weakened state over the past week made her more fearful of facing her loneliness. After discussing with my company, I decided to switch to remote work and work for a short time from home until my mother-in-law calmed down while taking care of her. But ever since then, she despised being alone. Even when I worked from home, she'd always be clinging to me. No matter how close we might be, I couldn't let her be seen by my coworkers. Even if I asked her to leave the room, she'd always be waiting somewhere she could see me. It felt like I was being watched, and I began to resent it. Mike, on the other hand, would come home on weekends and even take some days off during the week to help with her care. Although she continued physical therapy, there was no improvement in her condition, which meant I couldn't return to the office. Our personal lives were dominated by her care, leaving no time for just the two of us. This year marks the 10th year of this lifestyle. She turned 65. With each passing year, her dependency on us grew. My husband, unable to bear it, reduced his visits year by year. Even if I stepped out for just a few minutes, my mother-in-law would freak out, yelling, and she was like, "Take me with you." Calming her down took ages, and I couldn't go back to our own home. But I couldn't abandon the woman who had welcomed me, from a single-parent household, without any judgment or prejudice. Then, one day, everything changed. On this day, my mother-in-law had a routine checkup. As always, I accompanied her to the hospital. My mother-in-law's doctor was a woman in her 30s named Mia. She had been taking care of my mother-in-law for 10 years, and I trusted her completely. After my mother-in-law went into the examination room, I stepped outside to take a work call. When I returned about 15 minutes later, a young male doctor stopped me. "Excuse me, you're Sally's daughter, right?" Sally is my mother-in-law's first name. The doctor who called out using my mother-in-law's name was a male doctor a bit younger than me. It was Ryan, and he recently transferred to this hospital. He mentioned that he's worked in the same department as Dr. Mia, who has been in charge of my mother-in-law. Taken aback, I was like, "Yes, actually I'm her daughter-in-law." "But what's going on?" "Well, I'm sorry for the sudden approach. Do you have a moment? I need to discuss something about your mother-in-law." "Regarding my mother-in-law?" "Sure, what's up?" I figured my mother-in-law's appointment probably wasn't over yet, so I agreed. Then, Dr. Ryan looked a bit relieved and led me to a small private room. It was a consultation room, not too far from the examination rooms. Dr. Ryan motioned for me to sit in a chair on the side, and once I settled in, he took a seat across a small desk, looking directly into my eyes. "You're currently living with Sally at her house to take care of her, right?" Oh, yes, that's right." I explained that for the past 10 years, I'd been working from my mother-in-law's home while caring for her. I hardly had time to hang out with friends, let alone have some alone time with my husband. Because of my mother-in-law's increased dependency, my husband started avoiding coming home. I lost almost all of my personal time, so I couldn't really discuss the care of my mother-in-law with anyone else. Dr. Ryan nodded, listening intently, which made me spill all the frustrations I'd been feeling. "Oh, I'm so sorry for going on and on like this." He was like, "It's completely all right. Anyway, wow, 10 years. He said that with a gentle smile, and then his face grew thoughtful. Moments later, Dr. Ryan looked at me with a serious expression. He started talking. However, what reached my ears wasn't Dr. Ryan's words, but a scream from my mother-in-law. In a panic, both Dr. Ryan and I rushed to the examination room where my mother-in-law was, and what we saw was unthinkable. I was at a loss for words. Dr. Ryan shook his head and he was like, "You should leave that house ASAP. Get away from your mother-in-law." His words left me speechless. Suppressing the anger that welled up inside me, I nodded to Dr. Ryan. I didn't go to my mother-in-law but headed straight to the police. Though skeptical they'd listen, they promised to send someone to investigate, so I hurriedly packed up my things from the house. The image of what I'd seen at the hospital kept replaying in my mind. An hour or so later, as I was still packing, I called my husband to explain everything. Throughout, I kept receiving countless calls and messages from my mother-in-law. She must have been worried since I didn't show up even after her treatments. But I continued to ignore her non-stop calls and messages until I mostly finished packing. In the evening, my husband and the police arrived, and that's when I finally answered a call from my mother-in-law.
"Julie, where are you? I've called so many times. Why aren't you picking up?"
As soon as the call connected, my mother-in-law yelled with fury. Normally, I'd apologize immediately, but this time with a firm attitude, I was like, "I'm at home.
"Why did you leave me behind and go home first? How could you do that?"
My mother-in-law continued to rant and rave. Sighing, I was like, "Hey, I realized I don't need to live with you anymore, so I'm going back to the house where my husband is." I told my mother-in-law firmly.
Well, Julie, what on earth are you thinking? How do you expect me to live without you? How am I supposed to get back from the hospital?
You probably know best, right? Why don't you just walk back home? After all, your legs are fine. So, you don't need a wheelchair or care, right? When I continued like that, my mother-in-law let out a short scream. I could picture her being extremely upset.
You know I found out everything you've been hiding.
I then relayed to my mother-in-law what Dr. Ryan had told me and what I had personally witnessed. According to Dr. Ryan, recent tests showed that there were no issues with the muscles or nerves in my mother-in-law's body. That's when he thought it might be all in her head. He thought that maybe my mother-in-law genuinely believed she couldn't walk, and that belief was what was actually preventing her from walking. Apparently, the power of such beliefs can be incredibly strong, and he was considering not only physical therapy for her legs but also psychological care. That's why he thought to include me, as family, in the care plan and had called me over. But, it turned out, even that wasn't necessary. While I was speaking with Dr. Ryan, I heard a woman scream from the examination room.
Was that my mother-in-law?
Dr. Ryan and I exchanged glances and quickly went to check the room. The exam room door had a window, and through it, we saw my mother-in-law making gestures as if swatting away an insect. Indeed, the scream had been my mother-in-law's. But why would there be a bug in the exam room? As it turned out, my mother-in-law had mistaken dust for a bug. We saw her picking up the motionless dust and walking over to the trash can to throw it away. Incredibly, my mother-in-law walked without the need for a wheelchair or cane, moving with light steps. I stared in shock as Dr. Ryan pushed me to the corner of the hallway. Peeking into the examination room, we noticed that my mother-in-law didn't seem to be aware of us. She calmly returned to her wheelchair as if nothing had happened. Just then, Dr. Mia came back into the room and slowly extended her hand to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, seemingly in response, placed a brown envelope in her hand. Dr. Mia discreetly slipped the envelope into her skirt pocket and, acting as if nothing unusual had transpired, pushed my mother-in-law's wheelchair towards the facility for physical therapy.
Julie, are you okay?
I was so stunned by the series of events that I could only stand frozen until Dr. Ryan spoke softly to me. It wasn't that she couldn't walk or even that she believed she couldn't. She was pretending to be immobile. Trembling, I felt Dr. Ryan's hand on my shoulder, shaking his head gently. He advised me to leave my in-laws' house immediately, and I quickly packed to escape from my mother-in-law. Throughout my story, my mother-in-law remained silent. Finally, with a sigh audible over the phone, she began to speak, perhaps realizing she couldn't evade the truth any longer. It's true that I became wheelchair-bound after a car accident. And it's true I was injured seriously enough to need care. But thanks to the treatments, about 5 years after the accident, I could walk with the aid of a cane. My husband and I, listening over the speaker, were stunned. To think she had recovered in just 5 years. What then was the purpose of the 12 years we had spent caring for her? She was like I feared that once you both found out I could walk, you'd leave my side, Julie, Mike. I couldn't bear that thought. We knew she loved us dearly from her day-to-day attitude. She had us take care of her to ensure we wouldn't leave. Julie, I truly love you like my own daughter. After Mike moved out and my husband passed away, I felt so lonely. My mother-in-law repeatedly told us, but our hearts remained unmoved. We knew that, Mom. Mike. But the way you went about it was wrong. We can't be by your side any longer. Sorry.
Look, I've been taking care of you for the past 10 years while working. My colleagues have experienced promotions, marriages, and childbirth. Because of your care, I couldn't have a child of my own. I had almost given up on having kids. But now, I feel like the past 10 years are in vain. Why did you deceive us to the point of having us care for you? We would have visited you during our time off. Why did it have to be this way?
I didn't mean to blame her, but as the words poured out, so did my tears. With my husband supporting me, I told my mother-in-law that I didn't intend to care for her anymore. We would leave her house today and never contact her again. My mother-in-law protested and grew hysterical, but we hung up. The police, after understanding the details, said they'd begin an investigation. 2 months later. After moving, I was at a hospital with my husband. When we were about to leave after finishing our doctor's appointment, a familiar person rushed over to us. It was Dr. Mia, who was supposed to be my mother-in-law's doctor. We remembered her with fuller cheeks, but she looked gaunt, and fatigue emanated from her entire being. Wondering why she was at this hospital, we couldn't decline her as she approached with a desperate look, so we reluctantly listened to what she had to say. Turns out, Dr. Mia knew all along that my mother-in-law's leg was healed, and she had accepted money from her to give her a disability diagnosis. She mentioned the money was also in the envelope she received from my mother-in-law that day. Apparently, due to a complaint by Dr. Ryan recently, the hospital found out, and she was fired immediately. Furthermore, since she had continuously forged medical certificates, she's likely going to be arrested for fabricating medical records, and it's almost certain that her medical license will be revoked. But she insisted that she didn't do anything wrong. Incredibly, Dr. Mia claimed that the money wasn't an appreciation gift from my mother-in-law, but hush money from my husband and me. She alleged we plotted to scam disability pension by making my mother-in-law disabled, and she had written the necessary documents reluctantly after we threatened her and paid her off, but there was no evidence of any of this. It was Dr. Mia who extended her hand to my mother-in-law that day. I couldn't believe that she put all the blame on us just because she was in trouble, about to be arrested.
What are you talking about? We haven't done anything like that. No. That's the truth. I'm gonna tell the police everything.
Dr. Mia, her eyes red with rage, shouted, making us turn pale. While her claims had no evidence, it would also be tough for us to prove we had nothing to do with her. Terrified at the thought of being demanded to prove our innocence, a devil's proof, my husband and I were on the verge of tears when a woman approached us. She stood between Dr. Mia and us, shielding us. Aren't you the head doctor here? I urgently need to talk to you. Upon seeing the woman, Dr. Mia turned deathly pale. She quickly put on a forced smile, approached buttering up the woman, who was glaring at her. Do you need something from my daughter? Daughter? The woman, glaring at Dr. Mia, was the head doctor of this hospital, and she was Yvonne, my mother. Yes, my mother, whom I was separated from as a child due to her divorce, was a doctor. After divorcing my father, she quickly rose through the ranks and has been the head of a major university hospital. She was also one of the people who agreed with revoking Dr. Mia's medical license when she found out about her misdeeds.
Oh, you're related. In that case, could you please just hear me out? I was only threatened by them and wrote the diagnosis reluctantly. As a mother, you wouldn't want your daughter to be a criminal, right? Can't you help me out?
Dr. Mia begged, trying to invoke my mother's sympathy right then and there, but my mother shook her head. My mother was like, don't mess with me. You and Sally have been deceiving the hospital and the authorities for 10 years, keeping my daughters confined at home. Sally kept them at home because she was afraid to be alone. You, on the other hand, funded your debts from your nightlife with Sally's disability benefits. You frauds. You need to face appropriate punishment and make amends. Dr. Mia's plea was abruptly dismissed.
No way, absolutely not.
Dr. Mia, realizing there was nothing she could do, slumped to the ground in despair. Whispers and stares from those around us focused on her, and we couldn't help but watch with indescribable feelings. Suddenly, a strong pull came from behind. I was startled and turned around to find, astonishingly, my mother-in-law standing firmly beside my father.
You! What have you done to Julie?
My father, shouting angrily at my mother.
Dad, why are you here? And why with my mother-in-law?
When I heard that Sally was looking for Julie, I wanted to help. You moved to a place without telling me. I thought I would meet you if I followed Dr. Mia. The reason I hadn't told my father our whereabouts was not just because of the family connection between my mother-in-law and him. Ever since my mother-in-law had a car accident, I had asked my father to look after her when I was out for work. It was during those times that they became close and started dating secretly, behind the backs of both of us. I had found out about this last year when I happened to see my father and my mother-in-law talking closely at my in-laws' house on a few occasions after returning from an outing. I suspected their relationship and hence didn't inform my father when we moved. The very sight of them together now sent shivers down my spine.
Give Julie back. I won't let you take her away. Julie, Mike, let's go home.
My father, yelling at my mother, had an intensity I'd never seen before.
Brushing off my father's grip, I was like, stop it. I know all the stories you told me about Mom are lies.
My father's face went pale at my shout. Turned out, since the divorce, he had been feeding me lies about my mother to make sure I didn't want to meet her. The stories about her treating him like a slave or leaving him for a younger man were all false. My mother, an accomplished doctor, always had a busy schedule. My father knew this when they married. But after I started daycare, his attitude shifted drastically. He blamed her for our lack of family vacations and decided to divorce her, claiming she wasn't a good mother. And my father suddenly took me and left home on my 4th birthday. In reality, it was my father who left, not my mother. Following the divorce settlement, even though my mother had a decent income, she couldn't guarantee time for raising me. So, my father was nominated to live with me. However, my mother had been sending a substantial amount in child support every month. I didn't know until I met my mother. Even after becoming a single parent, my father made sure I didn't want to see my mother by portraying her in a negative light with false stories. It seemed that my mother wanted to see me, but most of time she was overseas for trainings or researches. Even she kept sending me letters to me from overseas, but my father kept refusing, hiding the letters. There were times when it seemed they might meet, but something always came up. Either my mother got an emergency call at the hospital or my father would come up with an excuse to cancel at the last minute. I had been told since I was young that my mother couldn't be reached, or that no one knew where she was. Turned out, that was a lie. The reason my father could afford to travel once every 2 months and pay for my high school and college tuition was thanks to the child support money from my mother. Our comfortable life was all thanks to my mother. So, the story of my father working late nights was also a sham. To make it seem like he was struggling with parenting, he'd work a regular 9-to-5 job, then spend night in somewhere, coming home only in early morning. When my father yelled and he was like, "Where's your proof?" my mother calmly showed him a mobile bank app. She was like, "This is how much I've transferred to you over the years for Julie, and your company unusually has strict policies against second jobs, so it was impossible. I can confirm with them if you'd like." My father crumbled, and my mother-in-law tried to comfort him. Seeing my father like this made me realize that I had been lied to my entire life. While the truth was shocking, I felt more anger than anything else. I was like, "Thanks for everything, Dad. But it's time to say goodbye," saying that coldly. My father clung to me, and my mother-in-law was like, "Julie, your dad did everything he thought was best for you." No, he did it for himself. He lied about struggling as a single parent using the money from my mom. And you lied to my husband and me, trying to bind us to your home. Both of you are a perfect match for your lies. Please, stay away from us and my mother. With no excuses left, my father and my mother-in-law were speechless. Ignoring their stunned faces, we left the hospital with my mother. Later, Dr. Mia was arrested and lost her medical license. She had forged medical documents multiple times and was sentenced to imprisonment. Additionally, the hospital she worked for is suing her for defamation. My mother-in-law had bribed a doctor for a fake diagnosis, leading to her having to pay back all the pension money she received with interest. She's also facing fraud charges, as informed by the police. Mike says he's cut ties with her, so he's not bothered about her future. I'm trying not to care either. As for me, I realized I had been somewhat dependent on my mother-in-law. Feeling betrayed sent me into a mental spiral, so I've been seeing a therapist at the hospital where my mother works. Regarding my reunion with my mother, when I was getting a referral at my previous hospital, the doctor's name I was referred to was the same as my mother's. To my surprise, it was actually her. My mother was skeptical when she saw a patient named me, but during the consultation, she realized it was me. Our reunion can only be described as miraculous. I can't be treated by my mother due to hospital rules, but she supports me from behind the scenes. I've been back to my job at the office while still attending therapy. When visiting Dr. Ryan, who informed me of the truth about my mother-in-law, I heard that he and my husband were old high school buddies. We now often hang out, with Ryan visiting our place, and everything feels like old times. It may be hard for me to forget how I was tied up by my mother-in-law and my father. But my husband, my mother, and Dr. Ryan always encourage me to take things easy and do what I want. Thanks to that, I'm planning trips with my friends or going to cafes by myself.
It's thanks to me that you're alive, you parasite. If you have a problem, then divorce me and get out.
In John's eyes, the kindness that was evident when we first met was now gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. The glasses he wore and the tie around his neck looked rather expensive, making it clear just how self-centered John had become just from his appearance and behavior. Fine, I'll leave. I said that, packed my things, and left immediately. And I vowed to retaliate against John. My name is Linda. I work as an administrative assistant in a company and live with my mother. Although I seem pretty ordinary, there's one thing about me that sets me apart from everyone else. That is, I use a wheelchair. In fact, due to a traffic accident I had in my student days, I had to live my life in a wheelchair, even though I wasn't fatally injured. When I first started using a wheelchair, there was a lot I had to get used to, and it was quite challenging. But, people are resilient, and once you've spent enough time in a wheelchair, you get the hang of it. Sometimes I wonder if this is what folks would call a silver lining in a cloud. To be able to think that way probably means I've come to a good place mentally. But just going to work and coming back home isn't enough to make life fulfilling. So, my favorite pastime was going to the local library in town to read. I've loved books since I was a kid, and even now as an adult, I'm still a bookworm. And that day too, I was at the library. But on that day, there was a medium-sized rock at the entrance for some reason, and I had trouble getting past it. The one who helped me was John. With his help, I could enter the library without a hitch. From then on, I often saw John at the library, and eventually, we started dating and finally got married. And so, I began living with John. But after a while, John made a surprising proposal.
Linda, I want you to take good care of our home, and I want you to be my rock. So, I'd like you to be a stay-at-home wife. Please.
Wait, a stay-at-home wife? John suddenly pleaded with me to become a stay-at-home wife, but to be honest, I really didn't want to quit my job. But John kept asking me over and over to be a stay-at-home wife, so in the end, I gave in. My colleagues never expected me to resign and tried hard to convince me to stay, but at the time, I prioritized my husband's wish over everything. In fact, just the act of telling the company I wanted to resign was exhausting, and by the time I did resign, I was mentally drained. Since I quit my job, life has felt dull and uninteresting. Out of boredom, I called my old college friend, Alicia, to vent, but she was quite critical of my feelings. In this day and age, where both men and women usually work, husbands who ask their working wives to become stay-at-home wives are rare. Linda, you're blessed, and you should be more grateful for your current situation. Alicia, unlike me, always talks about wanting to quit her job. It was clear that we had contrasting views. I had hoped Alicia might at least pretend to empathize with my frustrations, but she completely shut me down, leaving me feeling lonely. Plus, the allowance John gives me for household expenses is minimal, and I've had to be very frugal. When it wasn't enough, I had to dip into the savings I had accumulated when I was working full-time. Because of that, I was determined to not overspend and started cutting back significantly on my beauty expenses. Still, my savings were dwindling. Watching the balance decrease became a sad daily ritual, leaving me in a sour mood. But I found it hard to voice these concerns to my hardworking family, so I kept silent. So, without my fulfilling job and having to skimp on beauty expenses, the only joy left in my life was borrowing books from the library. Libraries are great, right? Being able to borrow books for free is awesome. At that time, I was more focused on saving money, and the joy of reading was overshadowed by the fact that I was borrowing books for free. It was a bit of a shock to realize how having less money could change one's perspective so much. Nowadays, with streaming services, you can listen to music for free, and there are definitely more free entertainment options than a few years ago. But, no matter how many free entertainment options there are, the reality of having less money still brings down your spirits. Even in such a situation, I still loved John. I didn't want to bring up anything with John that could lead to an argument, even if it meant distancing myself from him. For that reason, I never told John about the lack of household allowance. Instead, I silently endured, escaping reality by immersively reading books while listening to free music. However, after a while, John started coming home late more frequently. Concerned, I asked John, "You've been coming home late recently. Is something wrong?" To which John replied, "Work's been busy, and I've been doing overtime. Sorry for making you worry." Honestly, in this modern age where overtime is becoming rare, I wondered if he could really be working late so often. But, given that I was relying on him for our living expenses, I found it hard to question him further and let the matter slide. But one day, John unexpectedly stayed out overnight. Feeling suspicious, I checked John's phone while he was in the shower. To my dismay, it was full of evidence that John had been cheating on me. Moreover, it seemed that the woman he was seeing had been in a relationship with him even before we got married. Even after finding undeniable proof, I didn't have the courage to confront John about his infidelity. I guess, back then, I was still in love with him and couldn't muster the strength. However, I was hurt by his betrayal and saved the evidence of his affair on my phone. The revelation of John's cheating devastated me. On top of that, there was no sign of him increasing the allowance he gave me. Even though we were married, I wondered why I was the only one enduring such misery. Overthinking the situation gave me migraines, adding to my worries. Life felt so terrible. Yet, every morning, I had to prepare breakfast and lunch for John. By that time, I had grown weary of making meals for him, wondering why I even had to cater to such a man, often sighing in frustration. John seemed oblivious to how I felt, quietly eating his breakfast and heading off to work with his packed lunch. "He's probably gonna come home late again," I thought, sighing once more. But, surprisingly, John came home early that day and dined with me. However, he began criticizing me, saying, "The dinner today tastes off. And you're my wife, you should try to look prettier." Looking back, John might have been having dinner at his mistress's house, which could have been why he was coming home late. So, without realizing it, he might have been comparing me to his mistress, which is probably why he made such comments to me. I finally lost my temper and shouted at him. "After all the effort I put into making dinner, all you do is complain. Plus, I know about your affair. The reason I can't always look my best is that you barely give me enough money to get by. I've been using up my savings from when I was single because what you give isn't enough. I was better off when I was working and single." John, realizing that I knew of his affair, impulsively picked up a vase nearby and splashed its water at me. I was trembling, both with rage and fear from his unexpected behavior. John, seeming completely unapologetic, said, "You're just a leech living off me. If you've got a problem, divorce me and leave." His eyes, once filled with kindness when we first met, now appeared cold and distant. Looking closer, I could tell that even the glasses and tie John was wearing seemed expensive. Just by his appearance and behavior alone, it was clear how self-centered he was. "Well, I'm leaving." I said that, quickly packed my things, and left right away. And I swore to myself that I would get back at John. Although John clearly saw me leave the house, he made no move to stop me. In fact, he had an expression that almost seemed grateful I was going. I was shocked by how much John had changed. It chilled my heart to realize how quickly love can fade, even after we'd been so in love when we got married. I think I was probably crying at that moment. By the time the taxi I caught reached my parents' home, my tears had stopped, but the emptiness remained. My mother greeted me with surprise but warmth. "I don't know what happened, but come on inside." "Thank you, Mom." "It's okay, honey. We're family, it's what we do." "Yeah, thank you so much." The moment my mother hugged me, I started crying again. I thought my love for John had long since faded, yet I still found myself crying over him. Maybe deep down, I didn't want to leave John and was shocked by our separation. With so many emotions swirling inside me, my mother held me close, never letting go. Wrapped in my mother's love, I felt alive again, and an overwhelming sense of happiness. "Something must have really hurt you." Seeing me cry, my mother stroked my head just like she used to when I was little. We went inside, and my mother tried to distract me with some funny TV shows and offered me some oranges she'd gotten from a neighbor. By the time I'd finished the oranges, the TV show that came on was a comedy show that John and I used to watch together. It was a simple show where a humorous host chatted with comedians and celebrities. We really loved it. I was just silently watching that show, but I must have had a somber look on my face. Seeing me like that, my mother must have become worried and asked, "Linda, did something happen with John?" "There's been a lot, Mom. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin." "Oh, I see. It's okay, Linda. Take your time and tell me at your own pace, okay?" "Yeah, I'll do that." With that, I told my mother everything that had happened. After listening to my entire story, my mother was livid. "I can't believe someone would make my Linda feel this way. You can stay here as long as you want and relax. It must have been hard on you." "Thanks, Mom. So, you're close with John's mom since you both went to the same school. Could you, maybe, mention what John did to me?" "Got it. I'll talk to her the next time we see each other." "Leave it to me." Thanks to my mother talking to my mother-in-law, John got into big trouble. I had a missed call from John on my phone. When I called back, John shouted angrily, "Hey, what's going on? The allowance I was getting from my parents suddenly stopped, and it's causing me problems. You had something to do with it, didn't you?" Apparently, John had some debts from gambling, and he'd been using about 70% of his salary and the entire allowance from his parents to pay it off. Due to the sudden stop in his allowance, he was clearly panicking. Though it was due to my mother's interference that John's allowance was cut off, I didn't want anything to do with him, so I played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm busy. Bye." With that, I hung up. I felt a bit relieved knowing John was facing this predicament, but I wasn't completely at peace. The resentment I had towards John kept building up, and my stress had solidified over time. Just a little revenge wasn't going to be enough to ease it. And the thing is, when people have too much time on their hands, they tend to obsess over petty things. Of course, I was no exception. As days went by, my grudge against John only deepened, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I could have vented to my mother, but I felt bad complaining about the same thing repeatedly, and I already knew her response would be predictable. So, I decided to reach out to my old friend, Alicia. Alicia responded immediately, and I could tell she was doing well. "I've got something to tell you. Wanna grab a coffee sometime?" I suggested, and Alicia agreed enthusiastically. As the day approached to meet Alicia, I felt excited. It made me realize how much I enjoy social interactions. Just thinking about what to wear was exhilarating. On the day of our meetup, Alicia and I met up and went to a nearby cafe. There, I told Alicia everything about what John had done and the current situation.
I see, that sounds tough. Yeah, and John would give me so little for household expenses, but he always bought expensive stuff for himself. His glasses had all these fine details and embellishments, and his tie was made of what seemed to be expensive fabric with beautiful red and blue stripes. As I described the unique features of John's belongings, Alicia seemed to recall something and went silent for a moment. After taking a deep breath, she asked me, "Hey, Linda, can you tell me your husband's name? I feel like I might know him."
"Oh, really?
You know him?"
"His name is John Martinez."
"I do know him." "Wow, John Martinez is my boss. I really don't like him. He's so annoying and nitpicky, and his instructions at work are hard to understand."
I had no idea. But how did you figure it out?
Well, I happened to remember my boss wearing a distinctive tie that looked expensive. So when you mentioned a similar tie, I just thought maybe, and bingo! I was shocked.
I see. So, can you spread the word at the company about how messed up John is?
That sounds good. If all goes well, he might quit, and you can get back at him. I'd be happy to help.
And so, Alicia began to spread rumors about John being an unreliable husband at the office. Gradually, the news spread throughout the company. By that time, John felt like he was walking on eggshells, finding it difficult to be at work. After a while, I started receiving emails from him. The emails were about how he felt uncomfortable at the office and didn't know what to do. For my part, I felt like shouting at John.
"Why should I care? If you hadn't done what you did to me, none of this would have happened. It's all your own doing."
But I didn't want anything to do with John, so I ignored the emails. However, it's strange how men act. The moment a woman stops chasing after them, they start chasing the woman. I've read about this phenomenon in many relationship advice books, but I never thought it would actually happen to me. Probably because I had been ignoring John's emails, I received another email from him.
"After some thought, I realized that I need you, Linda. I want to discuss our future and try to start over. Please, can we meet?"
I could feel the desperation in John's message, and by the time I finished reading, I was completely drained. Even a single email from John could ruin the good mood my mother and Alicia had set for me. Such power he had. Now, how to deal with this email? I did think about ignoring it again, but on second thought, John and I are technically still married. Honestly, I wished I could erase the fact that I registered our marriage with someone who brings me down. I even wanted to divorce him right away. So, thanks to John's email, I finally made up my mind to get a divorce. I acted swiftly. "All right, if we involve our parents in the discussion, I'm okay with meeting you." And that's how I responded to John immediately. Soon after, I received a reply from John, and I was able to get his approval. I bet John probably thinks that because I'm seriously considering our future together, that's why I've said I want to discuss things involving both our families. He's likely in La La Land, completely misunderstanding the situation. As for me, I was in the middle of a triumphant pose, having successfully led John to that mistaken belief. I had been strategizing with my mother about how we'd teach John a lesson, and my mother had shared the plan with my mother-in-law. Then, surprisingly, my father-in-law also decided to join our strategy. It seemed that my mother-in-law and father-in-law were appalled at John's irresponsibility and bad character. They no longer saw him as their son. That's probably why they sided with me in this situation. So, with everyone except John, we kept discussing and refining our plan. On the day of the confrontation, my mother and I headed to the house where John lived. Upon arrival, John greeted us with a smile, but I felt a chill. Already in the living room were my mother-in-law and father-in-law. When everyone had gathered, John began to speak.
"Linda, would you live with me in this house again?"
"No, I want a divorce." I calmly responded and began laying out the lawyer's business card and various pieces of evidence of his affairs on the table. Seeing this, John paled as my mother-in-law and father-in-law started berating him.
How could you, as a man, let Linda go through all that?
I never thought you'd turn out to be such a loser. We're done with you.
Really, I don't want to see your face anymore, John. Ah, Linda, you can always rely on me, okay?
With that, John was berated by his parents, got a firm disownment, and in the end, it was settled that he'd divorce me.
Tell me it's a lie. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. Please, everyone, forgive me.
John's pitiful voice echoed throughout the living room. Afterwards, my divorce from John went through smoothly, and a little later, when I informed Alicia about it, she said she had some news too. Given the cheeriness in Alicia's voice, I thought maybe she was gonna get married, but that wasn't the case. Turns out, Alicia joyfully informed me that John had quit his job. According to Alicia's story, after John and I divorced, he felt increasingly uncomfortable at work and eventually chose to resign voluntarily.
Well, I'm just glad I don't have to deal with that annoying boss nitpicking or taking those lousy job instructions anymore. Really, it feels like a thanks for letting me go moment.
Alicia's carefree voice came over the phone. As for me, hearing about John's voluntary resignation, I felt a mix of happiness and emptiness. I mean, I didn't like John anymore, but he was once someone I loved. The fact that he left his job because of our issues weighed on me a bit. But John not only subjected me to financial abuse but also cheated on me. Maybe it was some kind of divine retribution. At least, that's how I tried to see it. Plus, John divided the property appropriately. Rumor has it that John is working day and night to pay off his debts and cover his living expenses. Seems like fitting punishment for him, if you ask me. As for myself, I've been living with my mother as usual. But I realized I couldn't keep doing that forever, so I started working as a full-time office worker again. Having had experience in administrative roles, I got hired quickly. My company regards me as an immediate asset, and they rely on me. Contrary to popular belief, office work can be pretty intricate when you get into the details. We administrative staff need to communicate well, teach each other, and sometimes cover for someone on maternity leave. Teamwork is essential. Working like this, naturally, I became close with my coworkers. That's why I really enjoy my job. Even when I come home tired, my mother, unchanged from those days, warmly welcomes me and has dinner ready. Having dinner with my mother, we chat about what happened at work today or engage in some light-hearted banter. I truly enjoy these moments. Frankly, my married life with John lacked these warm moments. It was pretty bland. So, I cherish this happiness every day, living joyfully with my mother. I can't thank you enough to my mother.
I'm totally loving this room. Hey, can we rearrange the living room? Of course. This is your castle now, Michelle.
The eldest son and his wife are quite giddy in their high-rise condo, overlooking lush green hills and a bustling city. It might seem like a delightful scene, but it's the exact opposite. That's because this is the house where I, the younger sister, live with my parents. Don't go rearranging things without asking.
You still planning on living here, Meg? 40 years old and still a leech? Jobless loser, get out.
I looked to my father for support, expecting him to scold my eldest brother and his wife. But instead,
man, I'd love to live with a young wife too.
In that moment, something snapped inside me. I was done. Done with my arrogant brother, his annoying wife, and even my dad who was head over heels for her.
All right then, take good care of Mom and Dad.
So you're finally moving out, huh? Don't want to see your depressing face anymore, leave today. My brother and his wife seem pleased, thinking they've succeeded in kicking out their loser older sister, while looking forward to their luxurious high-rise life. Little do they know what difficulties lie ahead. My name is Meg Roberts. I'm a 40-year-old single woman. I live with my aging parents, helping with household chores and taking care of my dad. I do mostly remote work, except for the occasional business trip. I've long been troubled by my difficult father and brother. My dad has always been a philanderer, spending most of the money on himself, so we've always struggled. And because of that stress, my brother, Alan, has been abusive towards me since childhood, always making me cry. My misfortunes continued into adulthood. I entered the workforce around the same time my dad got injured and couldn't work anymore. Bad things happen in threes, and just around then, Alan stole our savings and vanished. My already frail mom had to work multiple part-time jobs while taking care of dad, so I stepped up to help. Nights when I couldn't make it home from work, I'd stay overnight at the office, and then rush home to assist in caregiving. That's how my grueling 20s went by. I often thought about running away, but if I did, my kind-hearted, struggling mom would be left alone to deal with it all. As much as I hated my dad, I couldn't leave my mom all alone. In my mid-30s, my income finally started to stabilize, giving me some financial and emotional breathing room. About a year ago, during a business trip to Idaho, I stumbled upon a wonderful new high-rise. It was a modest 12-story building, but well located near the station and a supermarket, with a senior day care center and senior salon on the first floor. The building had excellent amenities like a gym and a spa. It was an ideal place to live for the long term. The view was also great, and for $500,000, you could get an apartment on one of the higher floors with a stunning view of the natural landscape. At the time, our old single-story house back in the New York metropolitan area was falling apart due to neglect over the years. I suggested moving to my mom, and she readily agreed. My dad was initially against it, but when he found out the high-rise was near a famous tourist attraction, he changed his mind. Probably just wanted to brag to his friends. We took the plunge and moved, and our new life started off well. We signed up for day services, became acquainted with the neighbors, and even participated in local festivals. The busy yet fulfilling year went by quickly. My dad goes to the Senior Day Care Center on the first floor 3 times a week. It's a facility that frequently organizes recreational activities, and the staff take him to hot springs and tourist spots. He keeps sending bragging postcards to relatives and acquaintances. It's a bit annoying that he's spreading the word as if he bought the high-rise condo with his own money, but since it doesn't cause any real harm, I let it be. My mom is making new friends at a senior salon and participating in community events and volunteering, which seems to be fun for her. It was also an ideal environment for me to work, and it seemed like I had finally achieved a calm and ideal life. However, the peace that had finally come to me was about to be shattered again. Alan suddenly appeared at the entrance of the high-rise condo. With Michelle, the woman he had an affair with and stole from her husband. That day, the ominous sound of the intercom echoed. When I saw the figure on the intercom camera, my heart froze.
Hey, I heard from a friend that you moved. Dad, that's amazing. Where did you get the money to buy such an apartment?
It was Alan, my older brother, who had been out of touch no matter how many times I tried to contact him. Alan, with the top 2 buttons of his Aloha shirt undone, sunglasses on, and speaking in a thuggish tone. I asked him coldly what he wanted. "What do you want?" "Oh, it's you, Meg. I heard from a buddy that you quit your job years ago and hardly ever leave the house now, huh? Being an old unemployed loser, that's pathetic." I still couldn't forgive this brother of mine. Because of this man, my mother and I had a tough time. However, if Alan had shown any signs of remorse, I would have been able to let bygones be bygones and treat him kindly. Instead, Alan mocked me, whom he should have troubled. I became even more resolute. "If you have no business here, please leave."
What? I came all the way here to introduce you to my wife. Open up.
Sure enough, there was a woman standing next to Alan. Honestly, I had a bad feeling about it, so I was reluctant. However, my mother said, "I don't know when we'll see him next, so I want to meet her," so I reluctantly unlocked the entrance. To my mother, he must still be her beloved son, no matter what. Alan, who barged into the room, sat down heavily on the sofa as if he had forgotten about the money he had embezzled when he was young.
"When did you get married?"
"Today." When Alan embraced his wife, Michelle, she boldly intertwined her arms. In front of her husband's family for the first time, doesn't she feel embarrassed or think she should be polite? But there was something more concerning. Michelle, you've only been divorced for 6 months? Yeah. I took her away from her boring ex-husband, who only had being serious going for him.
Alan fought against the company to steal me away and escape. It was so cool.
Michelle, who said she was 30 years old, had a face appropriate for her age, but her hairstyle and fashion were like a college student's. Moreover, she moved her body excessively and spoke in a high-pitched voice. I felt a strong aversion towards the two of them as they openly and glamorously talked about the fact that Alan lost his job due to the affair, without even trying to hide or downplay it. However, my father, who was there, was leering at Michelle with a lecherous gaze.
Michelle doesn't look 30 at all. She looks so youthful, almost like she's still in her teens, doesn't she?
Ah, I'm so happy to hear that. Hearing Michelle's flirtatious voice, a cold wind blew through my heart. My mother was also stiffening her expression next to me. This high-rise condo is very nice, but, Mr. Roberts, did you take on a loan at your age? My father answered Michelle's intrusive question with pride. I paid in full, so I only have to pay $100 for the management fee each month.
So financially stable.
I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted them to leave as soon as possible, so I asked Alan. When do you plan to go home? It's already evening, so we're staying here tonight.
What? It's a bit of a problem if you tell me suddenly. Didn't you book a hotel or something?
I came back to my parents' house for a night. What's the problem? But we only have one spare bed. Then, Michelle blushed and wiggled as she said, I'm fine sharing a bed with Alan. Actually, I prefer that. Feeling nauseous, I took out my smartphone and immediately booked a nearby hotel. Please leave now. Alan was reluctant and grumbling, but my mother quickly handed him some cash.
Stay at a hotel with this. Don't bother Meg.
Then, Alan left satisfied, taking Michelle with him.
Meg, I made you feel bad because I said I wanted to see Alan. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's not your fault, Mom. It's only natural for a parent to want to see their child after not hearing from them for years. When I remembered the faces of Alan and Michelle, who cleverly manipulated my mother's kind-heartedness to get money from her, I felt so frustrated that I couldn't help it. That day, I fell asleep at some point while working at the living room desk until late at night.
Please stop, Alan. Leave.
The next morning, I woke up with a start when I heard my mother's almost tearful shout from my room. I took off the blanket that my mother must have put on me and rushed to my room, only to be stunned by the scene before me. The room was ransacked, and things were scattered all over the floor. Alan and Michelle were throwing my clothes and daily necessities into a suitcase, one after the other.
What are you doing?
As I felt the blood drain from my face, Alan smirked and said,
You don't have a room anymore.
I see you have a lot of expensive clothes. I'll take some, okay?
Stop it. Enough is enough.
According to my mother, my father let Alan and Michelle into the room without asking them first thing in the morning. After Alan and Michelle closed their packed suitcases, they carried them to the living room and went out.
I really like this living room. Can I redecorate it to Michelle's taste? I want to line up all volumes of That Love is the Wind of Early Spring here.
It's a comic book that you love to read. Of course. This is your castle, after all. It would be a problem if you redecorated it without permission. Then Alan, trying not to burst into laughter, said,
You still planning on living here? You're 40 and still want to leech off us? Unemployed losers should get out.
He really intends to kick me out. I knew Alan was a terrible person, but I never imagined he could be this bad.
It's embarrassing as a human being to act like your father-in-law's condo is yours.
What are both of you talking about? Meg is. Alan brushed off my mother, who was trying to defend me.
Can you be quiet, Mom? You're the one who raised a 40-year-old woman still living with her parent.
It was bad enough that he was mocking me, but to hurl such abusive language at my mother was unacceptable. I was trembling with anger but swallowed it down. There would be no point in saying anything to such a couple. They had been looking down on me from the start. I looked at my father for help. His wife and daughter had been insulted to this extent. Surely he would scold Alan, wouldn't he? However, I kinda want to live with a young wife too. My father said such a carefree thing. At that moment, the tension in my heart snapped. I was fed up with my arrogant eldest son, his silly wife, and my father who was smitten with his daughter-in-law.
Well, take care of yourselves then.
Finally decided to leave, huh? I don't want to see your gloomy face, so leave today. This couple seemed to be basking in the joy of having driven out his parasite younger sister, who was leeching off their parents. They seemed to be looking forward to a glamorous life in a luxurious high-rise condo, without even dreaming of the hardships that awaited them. Having been kicked out with just one suitcase, I went to the nearest local city and rented a monthly apartment. I contacted my mother and had her send the rest of my belongings there. When I called to thank her for the delivery, my mother was crying, saying she felt pathetic.
Meg, you're the most filial child. And yet, your father and Alan are too cruel. But the most pathetic one is me, who couldn't stop them.
Currently, unemployed Alan and Michelle are leisurely job hunting while enjoying their dream life in the high-rise condo. Michelle even says things like, since the rent is covered, I can get by with less income, so it's okay for me to be a housewife, right?
It's not your fault, Mom. Besides, they will be the ones to regret it in the end. Would you be willing to help me with what I'm going to do from now on?
After listening carefully to the plan I laid out, my mother said this. If that happens, Alan and Michelle and your dad will be in a lot of trouble. But I think those three deserve it. I will cooperate. Thank you, Mom. I'll send some documents over. Make sure to get a signature from Alan at the right time and send it back. Understood. About a month later, Alan, who had been silent until then, suddenly contacted. Hey, a rent demand letter came. What does it mean to pay $1,000 in rent? When I questioned Dad, he said you bought the house. Were you deceiving me? Wasn't there no mortgage?
I wasn't the one deceiving, it was Dad, right? As you already know, that room is in my name, and since I paid in full, I don't have a mortgage.
Then why do I have to pay the rent? I sighed. Alan had accused me of leeching off our parents. But who was really trying to leech off someone else? There's no way he could live in the house of the sister he forcibly kicked out for free. It seemed like a massive boomerang.
You're living there now, right? Since you're borrowing it from me, it's only natural to pay rent. You did agree to it, right? Huh? I don't remember agreeing to anything.
Oh, that's strange. I have the original lease agreement here. It has your signature on it. There should be documents at your place that you can check too. Michelle and I turned the document holder upside down, and we could hear Alan freaking out over the phone.
What is this? I really did sign it. When did I sign this? I don't know. Oh, I remember now, Mom gave it to me to sign.
Huh? So you signed it without checking? Are you an idiot?
Shut up, you were there too, right? It was when we were getting ready to go shopping. Why didn't you stop me? You're the worst. Are you trying to blame me?
I listened to Alan and Michelle arguing over the phone with a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't a bad feeling.
Where's Mom? Did she become Meg's minion? It's useless. She's with me now. She won't be back for a while. What? Hey, Meg, where are you now?
Who knows? I don't have an obligation to tell you, do I? Speaking of obligations, you have an obligation to pay the rent, don't you? Alan stamped his feet in frustration.
Damn it! I can't afford to pay $1,000 a month.
I could hear the sound of Alan angrily smashing something like a bottle. If you break the floor or walls, I'll charge you for the repairs.
You devil!
Just then, Michelle, who had left earlier, came running back.
I found Dad's passbook while rummaging through the drawers. We should be able to manage with this, huh? 23 cents? Not even $2,300? Is there a digit missing?
The two of them were in such a panic that it seemed like a comedy, and I couldn't help but hold back my laughter.
There's no way Dad has any savings. The moment Dad couldn't work anymore, you took everything and ran away, remember? Thanks to that, Mom and I had a really hard time.
Michelle shouted at Alan, who was grumbling in frustration.
What do you mean? Michelle, I haven't heard anything about this. Ah, shut up, bringing up the past. It's easy for the thief to forget, but the victim never forgets the pain.
It's convenient, isn't it?
Okay, then please take care of Dad's senior daycare payments too.
At my words, Alan was silent for a few seconds, as if he didn't understand what I was saying.
Wait, what did you just say? The daycare payment. It used to be automatically deducted from my account, but I stopped it. So from now on, you'll have to take care of it.
Isn't the daycare fee included in the condominium maintenance fee?
There's no way that's the case.
How naive are you?
You should face reality.
Bye. I hung up the phone, exasperated. After that, Alan kept calling persistently, so I set my phone to reject his calls, and it finally became quiet. Later, Alan and Michelle, unable to afford the $1,000 monthly rent, had to leave the condominium. As soon as they found out he had no money, Dad was quickly abandoned and tried to rely on Mom, but he didn't know where she was, and her cell phone number had changed. He had no choice but to rely on me.
Please apologize properly for everything you've done so far. And correct all the lies you've been bragging about to your relatives in postcards. Write that you can live a good life in the condo thanks to your daughter, me. Then, I'll let you stay in the condo again.
My father seemed as if his pride had been shattered to pieces, and he became very quiet. However, at the end of the day, I think it was my father who underestimated me too much. This incident must have been a good lesson for him. When I returned to my condo and took a breather, the ominous chime rang again. When I checked through the video intercom, there stood Michelle, unbelievably.
Such a jerk, that man.
I couldn't believe my ears when she cursed, as if she couldn't have been openly flirting and calling him Alan just a while ago.
That guy cheated on me right after leaving the condo.
From what I gathered from Michelle's story, after leaving the condo, Alan and Michelle moved to the city, saying that condo was too rural. From now on, we will live a sophisticated city life. It was a classic case of sour grapes. But Alan, who was dismissed for misconduct, was unlikely to find a good job. Alan was apparently picky about his jobs and remained unemployed, eventually getting hooked on playing slots. They lived in a narrow, old apartment, and Michelle started supporting Alan by working full-time as a temporary staff. However, Michelle gradually became dissatisfied with Alan, who did not do household chores and was obsessed with slots, and they started having marital quarrels every night. So, he cheated. It's karma, isn't it? What's karma? I don't understand what you're saying. I started to feel a bit sorry for Michelle. You're pretty stupid and terrible too, but my brother is even worse. What a pity. But, I regretted sympathizing with her even for a moment after hearing her next words.
So, you have money, right? Pay the alimony instead. After all, it's your fault for kicking us out.
The conversation was so abrupt that I didn't understand what she was saying at first. As I gradually absorbed the situation, I was dumbfounded and firmly refused. There is no reason for me to take on the alimony, and if we go back to the root cause, you guys were the ones illegally occupying my house. When Michelle started yelling again, a serious-looking man in a suit and glasses appeared behind her and looked into the intercom camera. Excuse me, I came to pick up the latest manuscript of that wind. Michelle was startled and glared at the man. Who are you? Oh, I'm sorry for not introducing myself. I am Jeff, the editor in charge of Mississippi Roberts. Today, I came to pick up the manuscript of the manga that Love is the Wind of Early Spring. After a brief pause, Michelle started screaming hysterically.
What do you mean? Why is the editor of Michelle's Bible, That Wind, coming to this woman's house to pick up the manuscript? Huh? Don't tell me, huh?
It is exactly what you are thinking. I revealed the truth while finding the situation amusing inside. The author of the shoujo manga That Love is the Wind of Early Spring, abbreviated as That Wind, which you have collected all volumes of, is me. It took a long time to gain recognition, but thanks to this work, which I started serializing about 5 years ago, becoming a big hit, I became known as a late-blooming manga artist. And finally, I was able to earn enough money to buy the condo. So, That Wind is a very important work for me. Michelle was speechless at first, then started to tremble gradually.
So, some of the money I was happily spending to buy the latest volumes flowed to you as royalties. And all those heart-throbbing scenes were drawn by you, and I was being manipulated.
It was understandable that Michelle was confused, as the author of the comic book she revered as a Bible was the sister of the man she was currently hating. Michelle seemed to be filled with anger and shame, screamed "Gah!" and ran outside. And she never came back again. Later, I heard that Michelle and Alan got divorced. It seems that the person Alan had an affair with dumped him as soon as she found out he was an unemployed gambling addict. Now, I heard through the grapevine that Alan is making ends meet by working a live-in job. It seems to be a manual labor job that he used to be picky about and avoid. Since Alan has not contacted me, I do not intend to contact him either. If he contacts me, it must be for some ulterior motive, so I hope things stay this way for the time being. My parents and I returned to our former lives. The only slight difference might be that my father doesn't complain as much as he used to. He used to grumble about trivial things, but now it seems he feels inferior to me. By the way, the other day, my editor, Jeff, brought me the results of a reader survey for That Wind.
It seems that it won the first place in popularity among the serialized comic books in the magazine.
I decided to continue drawing the comic book for my readers and for myself. In this beautiful nature visible from the condo.
I once almost died, but I was able to recover and I feel like I've been reborn. I'm ready to start my life over, but I can't be bothered to take care of an old woman.
Although my husband was able to recover from his illness because I became a donor. He never expressed any gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer. Although I felt frustrated and anxious, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, he had been out and about, which had already made me suspicious. And now, I am the one who is sick. I have been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, it is not advanced, but I will have to start treatment with surgery and chemotherapy. I am filled with anxiety and I can't believe he is abandoning me like this. All my love and trust for my husband has vanished in an instant. The hardest part is that, for our daughter, Kate, he is undoubtedly her only father. I feel guilty about her becoming fatherless, but with my upcoming battle against the disease, I don't have the energy to try to repair our relationship. A month later, I received a series of aggressive calls from my husband, which I ignored. Eventually, he showed up at my hospital room and dropped a bombshell. My name is Christy Young, a 29-year-old housewife. I have been married to Mike, who is a year older than me, for 7 years, and we have a lovely 5-year-old daughter, Kate. I used to work full-time as a regular employee even after we got married, but I quit when I went on maternity leave. I really wanted to take it slow and raise Kate, but due to the economic downturn, we couldn't afford to live on my husband's salary alone. So, as soon as Kate was able to go to daycare, I started working again. I got a job at an apparel company where my sister-in-law, Lisa, is the president. They were looking for an office worker, and since I had similar experience from my previous job, they hired me right away. Although I am a relative, I was not pampered, but the atmosphere in the office was good, and there were many senior mothers, so it was easy to consult about childcare and take leaves for sudden fevers of my child. I am really grateful that I was introduced to such a good workplace. However, it was extremely tough to juggle work, housework, and childcare. In the morning, I prepared breakfast for my husband and Kate, made my husband's lunchbox, sent him off, took Kate to daycare, and went to work. After work, I picked up Kate, went shopping, came home, cleaned, bathed Kate, and prepared dinner. By the time I finished preparing Kate's meal, my husband came home, so I prepared his dinner, and while he was eating, I put Kate to bed. Although my days were hectic, my husband was not very cooperative with housework or childcare. Even if Kate had a fever in the morning and I was busy taking care of her, he would still say, "Where's my breakfast?" without any concern. When I asked him to do the grocery shopping because I had to work late, he complained, "I am tired from work." I was tired from work too, but I didn't have the energy to argue, so I ended up doing everything by myself. Our lives took a sudden turn. When my husband was advised to have a detailed examination after his company health check showed some bad results. My husband didn't want to get retested because he said he didn't feel any pain and was fine, but he started to feel a little uncomfortable in his daily life, with unexplained bruises all over his body, bleeding gums just from brushing his teeth. It would be terrible if he ignored it and it turned out to be a serious illness. We have to think about Kate's future, so I asked him to get a thorough checkup, and it turned out he had leukemia.
Why me?
He was shocked to hear a familiar disease name. However, leukemia is not incurable nowadays. There are many cases of remission and social reintegration through chemotherapy and bone marrow transplantation. I decided to support my husband, who was on the verge of despair and self-destruction, and accompany him through the treatment. He took a leave of absence from work and was admitted to the hospital immediately. As for me, I had to manage work, housework, childcare, and supporting my husband's treatment. I reached my limit before my husband did. The stress of hospitalization made him lash out at me more than before, which was one of the reasons. I knew it was misplaced anger, but I was honestly exhausted from going to work, taking care of Kate, doing housework, and visiting the hospital in my spare time. That's when Lisa, my sister-in-law, reached out to me. "Why don't you live with me? I can help with the housework and taking care of Kate." She was the president of a company, and I knew from working at the same place that she was always on the front lines of sales. She made a point of picking up feedback from the field rather than leaving everything to her subordinates, which made it easier for the staff to exchange opinions. So, I knew how busy she was. "I really can't impose on you. You're busy too. If you collapse now, Kate will be the one who suffers the most, right? I will support Mike as much as I can. You should rely on those who can help you now," Lisa said firmly, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I was worried about Mike, Kate's future, and my own health. I was really grateful for Lisa's presence, and her encouraging words saved me. Mike's parents had already passed away, and Lisa was living alone in her parents' house. I've always thought it was too big for one person. I didn't want to sell it because it has memories of my parents, but I'm glad you two can come. She warmly welcomed me and Kate. Living with Lisa was very comfortable. We had always gotten along well, and it felt like I had gained a real sister. Lisa, who had been living alone for a long time, was good at housework. She actively helped out, which made my life much easier than before. At that time, there was hope for my husband's treatment. I was found to be a compatible donor for his bone marrow transplant. As soon as Mike was diagnosed with leukemia, Lisa and I underwent testing to be bone marrow donors. The probability of finding a compatible donor is 1 in 4 among siblings, and it is said to be 1 in several hundred to several tens of thousands among unrelated people. We were devastated when we heard that Lisa's bone marrow was not compatible, but when we found out that I could be a donor for Mike, he was overjoyed. To provide bone marrow as a donor, I had to be hospitalized for several days. During that time, I had to take time off work and couldn't take care of Kate. It was a burden on Lisa, but she didn't show any signs of annoyance. "Thank you so much for doing this for my brother. I will do everything I can to support you, so don't worry about anything. Just take care of yourself now." Encouraged by Lisa, I underwent bone marrow extraction surgery for my husband. After the surgery, Mike had to spend some time in a sterile room, being careful of infections while resting. I was discharged from the hospital after a few days and, thanks to my sister-in-law's kindness, took an additional 2 or 3 days off work before returning. The hematopoietic stem cells transplanted into Mike seemed to be working properly, and after a few weeks, he was able to move to a general ward. When I took our daughter, Kate, to visit Mike in the general ward, there was a nurse in the room. Seeing Kate after a long time, Mike smiled happily. "Mr. Young is recovering well. He is still young and strong, so if he continues to make good progress, I think he can return to work soon. Thank you very much, as always." The nurse smiled and left the room. As she said, Mike's condition stabilized, and he was able to be discharged a few months later. Although he still needed to rest at home, the 4 of us, including Lisa, started living together in the in-laws' house. I had to take on all the responsibilities of work, housework, childcare, and taking care of Mike again, but it was less burdensome thanks to Lisa living with us. Moreover, Lisa is the type of person who can speak her mind clearly to Mike. "You don't have to push yourself too hard, but you should practice doing some housework as part of your rehabilitation." Hearing this, Mike reluctantly started helping with the chores. However, since he was still recovering, I often ended up helping him, and eventually, he stopped doing even the things he could do, knowing that I would come to help if he dawdled. "I still feel sluggish." Using that as an excuse, he wouldn't even try to get up from the sofa. When the doorbell rang while I was preparing dinner, and I asked him to answer it because I couldn't leave what I was doing, he sighed heavily and complained. "They told me to rest, and you're being demanding." I couldn't help but think that it was not too much to ask, but only Mike knew the extent of his pain. So, I believed him and made an effort to move myself, even if it was a bit of a strain. Perhaps because I overexerted myself again, my health started to deteriorate. It became harder to eat, and Lisa started worrying that I might have lost weight. By this time, Mike had almost fully recovered and had returned to work. Even though I no longer had to take care of Mike, the household chores and childcare didn't decrease. Even when I was not feeling well, Mike, who had regained his energy, started going out alone more often on his days off. He didn't seem to notice that I was unwell and didn't offer to help with the chores. When I asked him where he was going and with whom, he got angry and said, "I have a private life too." Eventually, the stress caused my stomach to ache continuously, and Lisa suggested I get a full medical checkup. Since Mike had been seriously ill, I thought it would be better to address any issues early for Kate's sake. As a result, this time I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, the progression seemed to be slow, but still, hospitalization and painful chemotherapy were necessary. At the sudden news of my hospitalization, Kate seemed anxious, but her father was out for the day, and he couldn't comfort her. Instead, my sister-in-law, Lisa, stayed with Kate. To avoid disturbing me while I prepared for the hospital, Lisa took Kate out shopping. While I was silently preparing, my husband, Mike, came home. "What's going on? Are you going on a trip or something?" I yelled at Mike's carefree demeanor. "I have stomach cancer." "Stomach cancer?" "I've been feeling sick lately, so I went for a checkup today. That's the diagnosis. I need to be hospitalized." "Hospitalized? What about the house during that time? Are you leaving it to my sister?" I was shocked that the first thing he worried about after hearing about my hospitalization was not concern for me. Granted, it's not a matter of life and death because the progression is slow. But still, facing his wife who is about to undergo painful chemotherapy, the first thing he asks about is the house, which I found utterly disappointing. "Well, this is just perfect." "Huh? Divorce me?" "What?" I was confused and bewildered by the sudden request. I had always supported him devotedly when he was ill. Now that I'm the one who's ill, he turns his back on me.
Having nearly died once and being able to recover, I feel reborn. I want to start over, and I don't want to take care of an old woman.
Despite my being the donor that allowed Mike to recover, not once did he express gratitude. In fact, he handed me a business card of a divorce lawyer.
You don't even wear makeup at home. I can't see you as a woman anymore. Even if you say that, I'm busy with work, housework, and childcare. I don't have time for makeup. That's just an excuse. On top of that, you have cancer now. I can't deal with that.
I was bewildered by Mike's angry demands to sign the papers quickly. I was already anxious about the cancer diagnosis. However, despite my frustration and anxiety, I wasn't shocked. Ever since he regained his mobility, Mike had been out and about, and I had been feeling suspicious since then. With this illness, all my love and trust for him vanished. What pained me was that for Kate, he was undeniably her only father. I felt guilty about making her a child of a single parent, but with the battle against cancer ahead, I didn't have the energy to repair my relationship with Mike.
Humph.
Now we are just strangers. Mike smiled satisfactorily.
Hey, is it over?
Don't just come in like that.
But you're taking too long.
Suddenly, an unfamiliar young woman appeared at the entrance. She wore flashy makeup and was dressed in a stylish dress, a beautiful woman. But on closer inspection, her face was familiar.
Are you the nurse from the hospital where Mike was admitted?
It was hard to tell at first glance because she was in plain clothes, but she was the nurse assigned to my husband's room at some point. Apparently, she seems to have been his mistress.
Yes, she is. She supported me devotedly when I was sick. Much more than you ever did.
I was dumbfounded by Mike's boastful statement. Supporting a patient devotedly is a fundamental part of a nurse's job. It's frustrating to be compared to her in that regard.
Get out of this house right now. This is my family home, after all.
And then he said that assertively. Indeed, this is my husband's family home, but it is now under the name of my sister-in-law, Lisa. However, if I divorce Mike, Lisa and I will become strangers. More than parting with Mike, it's sad to be separated from Lisa, who is kind, reliable, and has a good relationship with my daughter, Kate. But there's nothing I can do about it. I packed my suitcase with just the essentials, in addition to preparing for my hospitalization. I no longer have any love for my husband, and I want to get out of this situation as soon as possible. While I was silently preparing, Lisa and Kate, who had gone shopping, came back.
We're home. Oh, do we have a guest?
Lisa seemed surprised to see an unfamiliar woman, and Kate, clinging to Lisa, seemed to not understand the situation. So, I clearly stated, I am going to divorce Mike.
What?
Lisa looked as shocked as I felt. Then, as if realizing something, she handed Kate some snacks she had just bought and told her to eat them in the next room. With only adults left, Lisa immediately glared at my husband.
What are you thinking?
Mike recoiled for a moment when Lisa, not me, confronted him.
He's going to divorce me and start a new life with that woman over there. Since you and I will become strangers, he told me to leave.
Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief at my words.
Christy is having a tough time, and you? How selfish can you be? You're the one who should leave. Never show your face to me again.
Lisa firmly told off Mike, who clicked his tongue, snorted, and left the house. The woman glanced down at me, smirked triumphantly, and followed Mike.
Christy, I'm really sorry.
After the two left, Lisa looked at me apologetically. I felt guilty for making her, who had done nothing wrong, feel that way.
Please don't make that face. You've done so much for me, Lisa, and I can't thank you enough.
And I felt a bit relieved that Lisa had decisively cut off Mike. Even if you divorce Mike, I'll always be on your side, Christy. We had already vacated the house we lived in before Mike fell ill. Having been kicked out by Lisa, Mike now had no place to live, but he probably planned to move in with that woman. Although he had insurance and subsidies, Mike shouldn't have much savings left after his major illness. Well, it's none of my business anymore since we'll be strangers. Although we were no longer a married couple, Lisa is still helping me. I have to be hospitalized, and I was thinking of leaving Kate with my parents, but I was wondering what to do about transferring her kindergarten when Lisa said, "I'll take care of her." I know Kate will be anxious without her mom, and changing environments will make her even more anxious. My work is stable right now, Lisa said, so I decided to rely on her. About a month after I was hospitalized, I received a call on my smartphone. The name displayed was my ex-husband, Mike, and of course, I ignored the call. Despite ignoring it repeatedly, I kept getting calls from Mike. When I mentioned this to Lisa, who came to visit me, she said she also received calls and ignored them, but he apparently showed up at her in-laws' house. He apparently insisted on seeing me, but she sent him away, saying it was impossible since I was in the hospital. Don't pay attention if he says anything. It's too late for him to realize your worth now. Lisa's words made me feel stronger. After saying goodbye to Lisa, saying, "I am going home for today," Mike appeared in my hospital room.
Why are you here?
I hadn't told Mike which hospital I was admitted to. He didn't even ask.
I went to my parents' house today. I saw my sister leaving with flowers, so I thought she might be visiting you.
Apparently, he followed Lisa. Mike's persistence was terrifying, and I was puzzled about what he wanted. Then, he clung to me. My illness has recurred. It turns out, Mike's leukemia had recurred. Although remission is possible with a bone marrow transplant, it does not guarantee there will be no recurrence. So, can you be a donor again? I was dumbfounded by his audacity. I was battling a severe illness, cancer, and the ex-husband who abandoned me came back as soon as he fell ill again. It was all too convenient.
I don't care. Isn't it your own fault?
What do you mean?
Didn't you have someone who supported you more devotedly than I did?
Upon hearing my words, Mike looked regretful. It seems that as soon as she found out about Mike's recurrence, his girlfriend immediately broke up with him. She apparently said she could handle work but not taking care of a sick person in her personal life. "You're the only one I can rely on now," I firmly told Mike, who was begging for my help.
I absolutely don't want to. Are you going to abandon me when I am sick? You were the one who abandoned me first, right?
Mike was at a loss for words at my response.
Besides, I am currently consulting a lawyer about you.
A lawyer?
Yes, of course. Child support for Kate. I will make sure you pay. But I am sick. I am telling you, I am too.
As our fruitless argument continued, a doctor who noticed the commotion came into the room. The doctor restrained Mike, who was trying to grab me, and took him away. It seems that Mike was later handed over to the police. After being interrogated, a restraining order was issued against him. Hearing the commotion, Lisa came back to my room. After hearing the details, she seemed utterly disgusted by Mike's selfishness. I asked Lisa to testify, and after consulting with my lawyer, I decided to claim compensation from Mike and his mistress. Mike was very reluctant, but his mistress agreed to pay immediately, as if it were a severance payment. Since then, I have been slowly recovering. Lisa has been supporting me devotedly, and although Kate is still young, she has been cheering me on without being selfish. The cancer was successfully removed, and no metastasis has been found. On one hand, Mike still hasn't found a donor and is apparently living in fear every day. He managed to pay me the compensation by depleting his savings, but it seems that he won't be able to afford Kate's child support. Since he can't pay child support, he is not allowed to visit, so he is seemingly fighting his illness alone. I still have a good relationship with Lisa. After I was discharged from the hospital, I thought I couldn't bother her anymore, so I was considering moving out with Kate, but she got mad at me, saying I shouldn't think about unnecessary things after recovering from an illness. She told me to spend freely until I saved enough money, and I took advantage of her kindness and lived with her for a while with 3 of us. Since Kate is very attached to Lisa, We eventually decided to rent an apartment nearby even after saving enough money. We go back and forth between each other's houses, and now we have a relationship like best friends. I had a terrible breakup with Mike, and I was struck by an illness and had a hard time, but there are still people like Lisa who have supported me without changing. I may make Kate feel lonely, but I hope she grows up to be a strong, kind, and just woman like Lisa, and I want to continue to get along well in the future.
I brought something for you. Here it is.
I watched closely as Jason handed a cake box to my mother. Jason's forced smile made me feel a bit uneasy. I quietly took the cake box from him. After slightly opening the box and confirming its contents, I threw it into the trash.
Hey! What do you think you're doing?
Jason and my mother simultaneously looked at me and expressed their anger at what had happened in front of them.
What I did?
I asked my mother, amazed.
Did you see what was inside the cake?
My mother began to tremble at the unexpected question, as if she didn't think it was possible. I glared at Jason to confirm if my suspicions were correct. Jason looked frustrated and upset. Just as I thought. I clenched my fist, ready to get back at Jason for what he had done. My name's Jessica Smith. I'm 36 and I work as a caregiver. Work is busy every day, and by the time I get home at night after leaving early in the morning, I'm completely worn out. I knew the job would be physically demanding, but since getting married to Jason a year ago, we hardly see each other. Jason, on his end, works as a long-haul truck driver with irregular hours, adding to our difficulties in finding quality time together. Anyhow, we know we need to address our marital issues soon, but with both of us buried in our jobs, it's been hard to communicate. Our initial meeting was through a mutual friend. I've always been shy when it comes to love. After becoming a caregiver, I often declined invitations to social events after work. I wasn't the type to actively seek out a relationship, and after a long day at work, I just couldn't muster the energy to go out. Most of my peers were desperately looking for partners as they approached the marriageable age. Even if they were tired from work, they'd make the effort to find a romantic partner. While watching my friends passionately tackle their challenges, I, who had been nonchalantly avoiding relationships, suddenly started feeling the pressure after turning 30. Especially as everyone around me began getting married or having children. I can't go on like this. Even if I'm shy when it comes to love, I had always wanted to marry someday. So, I reached out to a friend who once invited me to a singles party, and she introduced me to a man of my age. That was my husband, Jason. Jason was 2 years older than me. He was always calm and composed, so I could sense the maturity that came with his age. What I needed wasn't a fiery romance, but a stable, quiet marital life. I liked him right away. Our interests aligned, and things moved quickly. We started dating and tied the knot a year ago. We began our marital life living with my mother. Without a father, I felt bad about leaving my mother alone after getting married. I thought Jason might object to living with my mother, but he was surprisingly okay with it. Though it took some time, I was able to get married and now live together with my mother. Everything seemed to fall into place and I was at ease, but from there, unexpected developments awaited. Something I couldn't have predicted just after our marriage. Right after Jason and I got married, there was an incident at my workplace. Several employees quit in succession. The reasons people gave for quitting varied widely. Some left to get married, while others wanted a change in career. While they probably didn't consult each other and quit all at once, the end result was that those left behind had to take on twice the amount of work as before. So, I started coming home later than ever before, and our lives became even more out of sync. So, when I left work on time for the first time in a while and sat down at the dinner table with Jason and my mother, I noticed the atmosphere in the house was incredibly tense.
Hey, did you take care of that thing we talked about the other day? What thing? You forgot? I told you to open an account at M Bank. Right. I forgot, my apologies. How could you? I told you countless times. It's really thoughtless of you to forget.
My mother looked amazed at Jason, sighing heavily. There seemed to be some exchange between them that I wasn't aware of, but Jason had forgotten something my mother had asked him to do.
What do you mean by bank? Well, Jessica, you have an account with M-Bank, right? We never know what the future holds, and I think it would be wise for Jason to have one too, but he just won't listen. I'm really sorry, I truly just forgot. Oh, really? Well, if that's the case, it's fine.
Indeed, I have an account with M-Bank. My mother deposits a small amount into that account every month, thinking of the unforeseen future. Probably, she plans to save for Jason as well. But Jason doesn't seem to get that she's trying to save for him, he just hears it as a demand to open an account. My mother has a bit of a bad habit. She speaks in a curt way, which can come off as cold. Because Jason doesn't get her real intentions, their conversations often miss the mark. That being said, I myself haven't been able to talk properly with my mother lately, so I've often had fights with her.
Come on, Jason is busy too. No need to be so hard on him. You always say things so carelessly, not understanding the gravity of what I'm trying to convey.
Not only is her tone sharp, but my mother also gets emotional quickly. So at that time too, it seemed that she was angry because her daughter didn't appreciate her kindness. That night in our bedroom, Jason said to me,
"Your mom always seems to be nagging me. She gives me these confusing commands. Every day, until you get home, she's like a broken record telling me to get insurance, invest my money, and all that jazz. I'm exhausted from work and I just can't deal with her anymore." My mom had a time in the past when she didn't have money, and she's just worried. Instead of saying that, please just listen to her a bit.
Knowing my mother's concerns, I tried to pacify the complaining Jason. On the surface, Jason seems to get along with my mother, but deep down he seemed to resent her. I get where he's coming from. I understand how annoying it can be to have someone go on and on about something you're not interested in, and even more so, how tiring it is to be constantly told what to do. But my mother just wants to ensure that Jason and I won't face financial hardships in the future.
I can't stand it anymore. I'll deal with insurance and investments when I feel like it. As for the M-Bank account, it's obvious she'll only use it for her deposits or investments. Nowadays, you can't have multiple accounts at the same bank. M-Bank is the closest to our house and she just wants an account, it's as clear as day.
Normally calm, Jason becomes very emotional about my mother. Being able to empathize with both my mother's feelings and Jason's frustrations, I simply nodded to Jason's story, letting out a sigh, wondering if there wasn't some way to resolve things.
It might be better if we lived separately. That way, we wouldn't have to deal with her constant nagging. Hey!
Jason knows I don't want to leave my mother alone. Making such a spiteful remark seemed rather mean-spirited to me.
I'm just kidding. I'm gonna do whatever she asks. Whether it's an account or whatever, I should just set it up for her, right?
He finally commented in a resigned tone, lying down on the bed in a huff. I didn't have any more to add, feeling uneasy. I just closed my eyes and lay down like Jason. So, after living together, it had been almost a year since the three of us had started living together and our feelings had remained at odds with each other. I feared that our days of discomfort would just continue, but an unexpected incident occurred.
Cancer!
Yes,
it's really frustrating to find out about this at my age.
One day, when I returned home a bit earlier than usual, my mother nonchalantly told me she'd been diagnosed with cancer. Jason hadn't returned yet, and it seemed like a good time for her to break the news.
Oh no! Is it serious? How advanced is it? It doesn't seem too serious yet, but I'm gonna have surgery soon and will probably be hospitalized for a bit. Can you handle the housework?
My mother, more concerned about whether I can do the housework than her own surgery, leaves me wondering if she's being kind or just interfering. Either way, her concern over something so trivial irritated me, somehow.
Of course I can manage. How old do you think I am? What's with you? I'm really worried about you. You're crabby. I get it without you saying it every time. I can handle the housework, you just focus on getting better.
I don't even know why I'm getting so worked up, but the fact that my mother has cancer seems to have hit me harder than I thought. I just can't be honest with my feeling, and I found myself frustrated again at not being able to offer my mother any comforting words.
All right, I get it. Jason would listen without any fuss.
My mother doesn't know what Jason really thinks about her behind her back. So, seeing Jason nod on the surface in agreement to her requests, which almost sound like orders, she probably believes that Jason is on her side. While she scolds Jason in a stern tone at times, she doesn't seem to be genuinely mad at him. In reality, Jason always begrudgingly listens to my mother, and he's never seriously paid attention to what she says. I want to tell that to her, but given my current standing, I can't say anything to my mother. Even though I'm truly on my mother's side, not Jason, all I could do was murmur it in my heart. Afterwards, my mother informed Jason that she has cancer and needs surgery. I don't know how Jason reacted, but seeing the peaceful look on my mother's face before she slept, I could tell she was comforted just the right amount. However, as expected, Jason seemed deeply disturbed upon hearing about my mother's illness.
How bad is your mother's illness?
I'm not sure.
All she told me was that it wasn't that bad. Is that so?
Jason didn't seem convinced at all and showed a cryptic reaction. With my heart in turmoil, I tried to calm down as I headed to bed. That was the end of our conversation for the day, and Jason and I went to sleep amidst the chilling silence. From that day, even more so than before, I continued living a life without crossing paths with Jason at all. It seems that my mother and Jason rarely see each other. In that case, when on earth does Jason come home? I usually go to bed before Jason returned and start my day either before he wakes up or after he has left. This is exactly what it feels like to live separately within the same house. I was starting to suspect Jason, having no idea what he was thinking. While I continued living a life without crossing paths with Jason, the day of my mother's surgery finally arrived.
I wonder if Jason will come.
My mother sighed in her hospital room before entering the operating room.
Even though Jason won't come, I'm here.
Jason. There's no need to prioritize a son-in-law over one's own daughter, especially at a time like this. Having such bitter thoughts, I wonder if I'm a narrow-minded daughter. I kept my surprise hidden and simply cheered my mother on as she headed to the operating room.
You got this.
The surgery ended roughly 6 hours later. During that time, Jason never showed up. Of course, I had informed him, and he should have known today was the day of my mother's surgery. I just had to assume he was busy with work. The surgery was successful, and the cancer cells in my mother were temporarily removed. She would need to stay hospitalized for a while, but I sincerely hoped she would fully recover. When my mother woke up from the anesthesia, she seemed distracted ever since she was briefed by the doctor. Of course, she was happy about the successful surgery, but she couldn't help but wonder when Jason would come to visit.
Don't worry so much. He'll come eventually.
Maybe Jason's fed up with me. Oh dear. My mother, who's emotionally volatile, upon realizing that Jason's taking forever to show up, can't help but doubt that she might be disliked. While her suspicions aren't entirely wrong, she still believes that Jason is on her side, so she probably feels betrayed. While comforting my agitated mother, I listened to her complaints throughout her hospital stay with a heavy heart. A week after the surgery, Jason finally came to visit. It just so happened that I was visiting after work, and I could see my mother's face light up when Jason arrived.
Hey, how are you feeling? I thought you'd never come, Jason.
My mother's tone made it sound like she had been waiting for a lover, which embarrassed me.
I brought something for you. Here it is.
I watched closely as Jason handed a cake box to my mother. Jason's forced smile made me feel a bit uneasy. I quietly took the cake box from him. After slightly opening the box and confirming its contents, I threw it into the trash.
Hey! What do you think you're doing?
Jason and my mother simultaneously looked at me and expressed their anger at what had happened in front of them.
What I did?
I asked my mother, amazed.
Did you see what was inside the cake?
My mother began to tremble at the unexpected question, as if she didn't think it was possible. I glared at Jason to confirm if my suspicions were correct. Jason looked frustrated and upset. Just as I thought. I clenched my fist, ready to get back at Jason for what he had done.
What the hell, Jessica? Throwing away the gift I specifically bought.
Jason immediately adopted an aggressive stance, as if to argue that what he'd done was right.
What do you mean? You should know better than anyone else, shouldn't you?
I wasn't about to let Jason have the last word. For a long time, Jason and I had been living past each other, and confronting him directly like this was somewhat intimidating. But I couldn't let my mother suffer because of Jason's malice. That was the one thing I absolutely needed to prevent.
What are you talking about? Hey, try the cake. It's delicious.
Jason retrieved the cake box from the trash and pulled out the contents. It looked like a standard cream cake. But I recognized instantly. The cake wasn't from a bakery. As evidence, the cream was unevenly spread, and the strawberries on top looked somewhat pale and damaged. Yet, my mother didn't seem to notice such details, and she gazed at the cake, asking, "Huh?
Hold on, let me try it first."
I swiftly grabbed the cake from between Jason and my mother, who were close to each other, and took a bite from the edge. I really didn't want to, but there was no other choice. This was the only way to prove Jason's wrongdoing. After taking a bite at the cake, I immediately sensed something was off. First, it was incredibly salty. So salty and bad that I felt like throwing up. There was also an overpowering smell of alcohol, far more than what would normally be in such a dessert. I spit the cake into a tissue that was in the hospital room. Seeing my reaction, I could tell my mother's expression stiffened.
This is unbelievable. What's with this taste? Loads of salt and alcohol. Aren't these the very things a cancer patient shouldn't consume?
Even for healthy individuals, consuming too much salt and alcohol is toxic. For cancer patients, it further increases the risk of the disease. The idea that he intentionally wanted to feed this to my mother was horrifying. As Jason didn't anticipate I'd taste the cake, I could see him go pale.
You knew Mom's cancer treatment caused taste disturbances. So, you brought this. What's your aim?
It's not uncommon for cancer patients to have taste disturbances from treatments. I remember my mother telling me recently, I can't taste the food. Given her surgery, it should improve. But if Jason was aware of my mother's taste issues, it's not surprising he thought of the alcoholic cake. My mother looked at Jason with sheer terror. She seemed to have finally realized that he wasn't on her side. And as for Jason, he finally abandoned the facade of goodwill, lifted the corner of his eye and spoke with a defiant expression.
The goal? It's obvious. To hasten this old hag's disease and cash in on the insurance money.
Jason let out a loud, almost hysterical laugh. He's insane. He bragged about doing it for the insurance money and tried to harm my mother. To know he had such intentions and would brazenly admit to them was horrifying. A chill ran down my spine.
Huh? Do you even realize what you were trying to do? That's a crime, you know. I know, and I don't care if I become a criminal. I just want to get rid of this old hag as soon as possible.
It's clear that when Jason scornfully referred to my mother as an old hag and tried to make her eat the poisoned cake, the image of Jason inside my mother's mind completely crumbled. That's how much my mother had a look of despair on her face.
You're always nagging me, telling me to do this and that, and you get mad when I don't obey. My life isn't just for you, old hag. Don't order me around. It makes me sick.
Jason vents the pent-up frustrations he's felt up until now at my mother. My mother looked at Jason with shocked eyes.
I just didn't want you to struggle with money, Jason. I don't care about that. I decide for myself. Don't interfere in my life every single time. Damn it, you ruined my plan. What are you gonna do, Jessica?
Jason glared at me while stamping his foot angrily. I held my head up high, trying not to be cowed by his snake-like eyes. In the corner of my vision, I could see my mother's frail body, crushed by despair. Wait for me, Mom. I'll drive this guy away.
Sorry to break it to you, but instead of getting insurance money, you're the one who's gonna have to pay alimony. Huh? What the hell are you talking about?
Jason laughed scornfully. He still hasn't realized. There's no way I'd confront you like this without any ammunition. I took out a large envelope from my bag and scattered its contents at Jason's feet. Seeing the contents of the envelope, the color drained from Jason's face in an instant. Looks like he recognized them. That makes things easier.
These were investigated by a private investigator. I suspected you might be cheating. To my surprise, so much evidence came out so quickly. How's it going with your mistress?
What I had laid out in front of Jason were numerous evidences of his affair brought by the investigator. Most of the photos are of him with his mistress. I didn't really want to look directly at the photos, but seeing Jason in them, leering and intertwining his arm with that woman's, fueled my determination.
How's it going? What the hell are you talking about? This is so unfair.
Realizing he could no longer make excuses with such evidence presented to him, Jason didn't try to dodge the blame. Instead, he lashed out, trying to paint me as the villain. But to me, it just sounded like the whining of a loser. No matter how much Jason shouted, I wasn't scared at all.
Unfair? Who's being unfair? Sneaking around cheating on me while pretending to be busy, and then trying to do something terrible to my mom? Unbelievable. I thought you were busy with work, but you were actually busy cheating, weren't you? I feel so stupid for feeling down because we were living separate lives.
Reflecting on my life up until now, tears naturally welled up in my eyes. I got married later than everyone else around me, but I was so happy when I married Jason. It saddened me that Jason would speak ill of my mother and that we could no longer hold a conversation together. My pent-up sadness and frustration that I couldn't vent to anyone suddenly exploded. Yet, even seeing me like that, Jason just sneered at me.
I don't care about that. I was planning to live happily with Emma after getting a ton of insurance money. But you ruined it, you damn woman.
Ignoring my feelings entirely, Jason continued to spew insults. Emma must be the name of his mistress. Doing my best to suppress my trembling body, I tried to retort to Jason. But before I could, my mother spoke up.
I've been listening, and Jason, you're unbelievable. Not only for what you tried to do to me, but how can you speak to Jessica like that? It's because of you and your daughter that I've never been happy in my married life. It's your fault.
Jason wasn't the calm and cool guy I once thought he was anymore. Distorted with ugliness, his desire to get away from me and my mother was painfully clear. My mother seemed to have finally lost her patience with Jason's incessant ranting.
Excuse me? Our fault? Do you have any idea how much we've considered you in our lives? I've been saving money for you every month. Jessica, even when she was super busy, has been juggling work and housework. And yet you trample on our efforts like this? It's unbelievable.
I could see the fire in my mother's eyes. Startled by her intensity, Jason took a step back.
Shut up! I never asked for any of that.
Jason tried to fight back against my mother, but it seemed to have no effect on her.
Shut up! Apologize to Jessica. And never come back home. Jessica can be happy without a jerk like you.
Hearing my mother shout, Jason finally fled the scene. The evidence of his infidelity remained scattered on the floor. I looked at my mother's face. Breathing heavily, my mother embodied the very image of a noble mother protecting her precious daughter.
Mom, thank you. That guy's unbelievable. Jessica, find a better man. You deserve more happiness.
I had thought my mother didn't care about me at all. But she stood up for me. She truly cared for me. Realizing that alone brought tears to my eyes, and I sobbed uncontrollably in her chest. She gently stroked my back. After that, on my way back from the hospital, I stopped by a lawyer's office and decided to proceed with the divorce process. When I got home, I immediately contacted Jason to let him know that I would be proceeding with the divorce process through a lawyer. Jason seemed to have talked to my lawyer. And just like that, our divorce was finalized smoothly. After that, Jason moved out. He's probably living with that so-called Emma. But I doubt they'll ever find true happiness. Through my lawyer, I intend to seek damages from Jason for trying to feed my mother a poisoned cake. Knowing Jason, who was hoping to rely on my mother's life insurance, he's probably tight on money now. Well, it's no longer my problem. Of course, I haven't given Jason the money that my mother had saved up for him. If nothing had happened, he wouldn't have had to worry about money. I hope he struggles. As for me, after my mother was discharged from the hospital, we started our life together. I moved to a workplace with shorter working hours so I could spend more time with my mother. I plan to enjoy life just with my mother for a while. I haven't yet given back to her. But now, I'm able to talk much more openly with my mother than before, and I'm truly